My human husband seemed so weak until our world fell apart. Part 1. Lyra Vial had lived for 212 years, and in all that time she had never done anything that surprised her peers quite as much as marrying a human. She was a Verath, tall, pale-skinned, with silver eyes that could see in near total darkness, and a body that could run for 6 hours without rest. Her people were old by galactic standards. They had been traveling between stars before most species had learned to write. They were calm by nature, precise in thought, and slow to feel anything they could not explain. Verath did not make rash decisions. Verath did not act on feeling alone. And Verath, as a general rule, did not fall in love with humans. But Lyra had. His name was Cole Harmon. He was 34 years old, which by Verath measurement meant he was barely a child. He had grown up on a cattle ranch in the state of Montana, on a planet called Earth, in a solar system that most of the galaxy still struggled to find on a map. He was not tall, not broad, not particularly fast. He had dark hair that he never combed properly, hands that were rough from years of outdoor work, and a calm way of speaking that made it seem like nothing in the universe could truly surprise him. He had come to Verith Prime 3 years ago on a labor migration program. The colony needed workers who understood large animal management, because the Verith had introduced a herd species to the outer farmlands and had no experience with animal behavior. Cole had experience. He had spent his whole life working with animals that were bigger and stronger than him and learning how to handle them without force. He had stayed on Verith Prime when the program ended because by then he had met Lyra at a colony research dinner, had talked with her for 4 hours about biological adaptation in low-gravity environments, and had made her laugh twice, which was 2 more times than any other person had managed that year. They married 6 months later. It was quiet and small. Cole wore a clean shirt. Lyra wore her family's ceremonial silver. Her colleague, Dara Oss, attended and smiled politely, and later asked Lyra, privately, whether she was certain. "He is very short," Dara said, in the way that Verith sometimes said things that were meant to be kind, but were not. "He is average height for a human," Lyra said. "And the lifespan issue," Dara continued. "You will outlive him by 1.5 centuries, minimum." "I know," Lyra said. Dara did not ask again, but others did, in various ways. Elder Sovan, who was Lyra's supervisor at the Biology Institute, once watched Cole carry a box of research equipment across the Institute courtyard and said, with genuine curiosity, "Does he need help?" Cole had been carrying the box without difficulty. Sovan's question was not really about the box. The thing was, from the outside, Cole did seem unremarkable. He could not lift what a Verith could lift. He needed 7 to 8 hours of sleep each night. He got cold easily. He bruised. He cut himself on things. When Lyra and Cole went hiking the volcanic ridgelines together, she had to slow her pace to less than half her normal speed, or he would fall behind. She never made a point of it, but she noticed it. She noticed every small way in which his biology fell short of what she had grown up considering normal. He noticed her noticing, she was fairly sure. He never said anything about it. What Cole was, beyond all the things he was not, was steady. That was the word Lyra always came back to. Steady. When a situation became difficult, he did not panic. When something went wrong, he thought about it quietly, and then did the next necessary thing. When Lyra had a frustrating day at the Institute and came home sharp-tongued and tired, he cooked dinner, always cooked, even though nutrition centers existed in every room, and asked her one question about her day, and then let her talk until she had talked herself into a better mood. She had once asked him, during their first year together, why he cooked when there was no need. He had looked at her with a slightly puzzled expression, as though the answer was too simple to require much thought. "Because it tastes better," he said, "and because it gives me something to do with my hands while I think." That was Cole. He always had a reason. The reasons were always simple. The simple things, she was slowly learning, were not always small things. Their home was on the western edge of the colony's residential zone, with a long view of the amber-colored ridgelines that rose toward Vareth Prime's second mountain range. It was modest by Vareth standards: 2 floors, a wide porch, a yard that Cole had planted with a mix of earth vegetables and Vareth root crops that had no business growing next to each other, but somehow did. He had spent 3 weeks getting the soil ratios right. Lyra had offered him the Institute's agricultural database. He had thanked her and used it, but he had also gone out each morning and pressed his fingers into the soil and made his own assessments. "You could save a lot of time by just reading the analysis," she told him once. "I know," he said, "but I like to check." She did not understand that then. She thought it was a quirk, something left over from his ranching years, a habit that had not adjusted to a more technological life. She filed it under the general category of human inefficiency and thought nothing more of it. On the evening that would turn out to be the last quiet evening of their lives on Vareth Prime for a very long time, Cole was standing at the kitchen counter making a stew from a mix of earth lentils and a local grain that he had decided on his own were compatible. The kitchen smelled warm and slightly smoky. Outside, the ridgelines were going dark in the way they always did at the end of the day, the amber fading to deep red, and then to nothing. Lyra was sitting at the table with a research report in front of her, half reading it, half listening to Cole talk. He was telling her a story about a calf he had once pulled from a ditch in a Montana snowstorm. The calf had been stuck for hours. The ground had been ice. He had gone in alone because no one else was close. "She didn't want to come out," he said, stirring the pot. "Just lay there, stopped fighting. Animals do that sometimes when they've decided it's over." "What did you do?" Lyra asked, because in spite of herself she was listening now. "I just stayed," he said, or sat down in the ditch next to her and stayed until she figured out I wasn't leaving. Then she got up. Lyra looked at him across the kitchen. He was stirring the pot, calm and unhurried, not even looking at her. She went back to her report. She did not know then how much that story mattered. She did not know that she was going to need to remember it. She did not know that within 48 hours, the sky above Vareth Prime was going to crack open and everything she had ever relied on was going to stop being reliable, and that the only steady thing in her world was going to be the unremarkable human man standing at her kitchen counter, arguing cheerfully with a pot of boiling lentils. She did not know any of that yet. She just sat and listened to him talk, and in the last quiet evening either of them would have for a long time. My human husband seemed so weak until our world fell apart, Part 2. The first sound was low and far away like distant thunder rolling in from the mountains. Lyra heard it in her sleep and did not wake. Cole woke immediately. He sat up in the dark and listened. Lyra felt the movement and opened her eyes. "What is it?" she asked. "Not sure," he said. He was already pulling on his boots. The second sound was not like thunder at all. It was a sharp, tearing noise, high and hard, and it came with a light. The light was the wrong color. Vareth Prime had no lightning storms in this season, and the sky through the bedroom window was not doing anything a sky should do. It was a deep, burning orange where it should have been black, and it pulsed in a rhythm that made no natural sense. Cole went to the window. Lyra went to the emergency comm unit on the wall. The unit was already screaming. Not with words at first, just with the alarm tone that the colony broadcast system used for severe weather events and seismic activity. But weather and seismic events had their own codes, and the code running now was not either of those. It was the code that Lyra had learned in colony orientation 12 years ago and had never expected to actually hear. It was the code for external threat. "Cole," she said. "I see it," he said from the window. His voice had changed. It was the same even tone, but something underneath it had gone very quiet. The way a room goes quiet when everyone in it has realized the same bad thing at the same time. The comm unit broke through its own alarm and started broadcasting a voice. It was Elder Sovin's voice, which meant the Institute's emergency systems had been activated. The words came in fragments because the signal was already breaking up, but the fragments were enough. Unknown vessels, orbital grid failure, all outer residential zones evacuate, all non-essential personnel move to reinforced structures. And then a word that Lyra had not heard in her lifetime, not in any real and present context. A word from history reports and old Galactic War archives. Keth. The transmission cut. For exactly 4 seconds, Lyra stood in the middle of her bedroom on a peaceful colony world where nothing had ever gone truly wrong and she was unable to move. Her mind, which was a very good mind by any measure, and was trying to process information that it had no living framework for. The Keth were dead. Everyone knew the Keth were dead. The Keth Empire had collapsed 300 years ago, and the remnants had scattered and disappeared. There was no such thing as a Keth attack. There could not be. But the sky outside the window was still the wrong color, and the sound was getting louder. Lyra. Cole's hand was on her arm. I need you to tell me where the emergency kit is. She looked at him. It is in the lower storage cabinet, under the porch stairs. I have not checked it in 2 years. Okay, he said. He was already moving. Get dressed. Put on your thermal layer. Bring your research drive if you can grab it in 30 seconds. Leave it if it takes longer. She dressed. She grabbed the research drive. It took 11 seconds. Cole came back with the emergency kit, which was a sealed gray case that the colony issued to all residential units. He opened it on the floor and went through it with quick, practiced hands, the way he checked things, always checked things, even when he had already been told they were fine. Water tabs, heat packs, medical kit, 2 short-range comm devices, a handheld shelter sheet, a power cell. He took inventory quietly, moving items from one side to the other. The shelter is in the research valley, Lyra said. My institute shelter. It is rated for seismic events up to level 8. It is 11 kilometers east. Can we get there without crossing the main colony road? She thought. Yes, through the back ridge trail. It adds 2 kilometers, but it avoids the road. Good, he said. He packed the kit, and he handed her one of the comm devices. He put the water tabs in his jacket pocket because they were small, and his jacket had more pockets than her research coat. He was not frightened. She could see that clearly. He was not performing calm. She knew the difference. She had spent her career studying living organisms, and she understood the difference between performed behavior and genuine state. He was simply not frightened in the way she was frightened. He was somewhere else in his head, somewhere very practical, moving through a list that only he could see. The walk to the Research Valley shelter was the longest 2 hours of Lyra's life to that point. They went up the back ridge trail in the dark, and the sky behind them lit up 3 more times with the burning orange light. Each time it lit, it was accompanied by a sound that pressed on the chest from the outside. Cole walked in front, slightly faster than his usual pace, navigating the trail from memory even though it was dark. He had walked it with her on weekends, on their hikes, and apparently he had been paying more attention to the terrain than she had realized. Once, halfway up, she stumbled on a loose rock. His hand caught her arm before she hit the ground. She did not know how he had seen her stumble in the dark. They reached the shelter just before the first real impact hit the colony. The sound of it was enormous. The ground moved, not violently, just enough to feel, a single deep shudder, like the planet itself flinching. Lyra stood in the shelter entrance and looked back toward the colony hub, 10 kilometers west, and watched a column of fire rise above the ridgeline and stay there. She had read about war. She had studied historical records of the old conflicts, the Keth expansion, the Reth border wars, the long silence afterward. She understood it intellectually. She could describe the mechanics of large-scale bombardment, the physics of orbital weapons, the biological impact of sustained conflict on civilian populations. None of that prepared her for standing in the dark and watching something she loved burn. Her legs stopped working. She did not fall. She simply stopped walking, stopped moving, stopped being able to make any decision at all. She stood in the entrance of the shelter and her breath came too fast, and her vision went strange at the edges, and she could not remember what she was supposed to do next. Cole guided her inside, but he sat her down on the shelter bench. He pressed a heat pack into her hands and closed her fingers around it, not because she was cold, but because he seemed to understand that her hands needed something to hold. He went to the shelter's comm panel and began working through frequencies looking for a signal. The panel was basic, research grade, not military, but it was functional. He found fragments. He found enough to start building a picture, and he talked while he worked, not loudly, just steadily, telling her what he was hearing and what he thought it meant. He was not telling her it was going to be fine. He was not saying things that were not true. He was just talking, low and even, in the same tone he used when he was cooking and thinking. It was the most useful thing anyone had ever done for her in that moment. And she could not have explained why. After a while, her breathing slowed. The heat pack was warm in her hands. Outside, the sky was still wrong, but she was looking at the comm panel now, not the sky. Cole turned from the panel and looked at her. "Northeast of here, about 40 kilometers," he said. "There's a secondary research station. From what I can hear, that's the fallback point. That's where people will be." She nodded slowly. "The Torvin station. Yes. It has reinforced structures and a long-range comm array." "Can you get us there?" She looked at him. He was asking her. Not because he doubted she could, she realized. Because he needed her to answer yes. Because he needed her to come back to herself. "Yes," she said. "Then we leave at first light," he said. And he sat down beside her and did not say anything else. And then somehow, that was exactly right. My human husband seemed so weak until our world fell apart, Yurt 3. They left the shelter at first light, when the sky was still gray and the air smelled like ash. Lyra had pulled the colony terrain map from her research drive and transferred it to the handheld comm device. 41 kilometers to the Torvin secondary station. The route Cole had chosen avoided the main colony roads entirely, which meant moving through highland terrain. Loose rock, steep ridges, narrow paths that were built for light hiking, not emergency travel. He studied the map for about 10 minutes before they left. Then he put the device in his jacket and did not take it out again for the first 8 kilometers. She asked him about that later. He said he had memorized the general shape of it. She believed him. And the first day was quiet in the wrong way. They could hear things in the distance. Low mechanical sounds that did not belong to the natural world of Vareth Prime. Twice, far to the west, something large moved through the air and the sound of it pressed against the sky. Cole put his arm out when it happened, and they stopped walking and stood very still among the rocks until the sound faded. He watched the skyline with a stillness that reminded Lyra of something, though it took her until the second hour to understand what. He watched the same way he described watching animals on his ranch. Patient, without expectation, reading the environment the way other people read text. At midday, they stopped behind a shelf of volcanic rock and ate 2 compressed meal tabs from the emergency kit. Cole ate his in 3 bites and then sat and watched the terrain while Lyra ate hers more slowly. She was not hungry. She made herself eat anyway because she understood biology well enough to know that not eating did not make anything better. "How are your feet?" she asked him. It was a strange question, she knew. But humans were prone to foot problems. Their footwear was not designed the way Vareth footwear was. The trail was rough. "Fine," he said. She looked at him. "They're okay," he said, in a slightly different tone, which she had learned meant the first answer was not entirely honest, but the second one was close enough. She filed it and said nothing. They found the others on the afternoon of the first day. Lyra heard them first, a sound of movement behind a cluster of boulders about 30 meters to the north. She stopped. Cole had already stopped. He was looking at the boulders with his head slightly tilted, and he held up one hand, flat, which she had learned was his way of saying wait without speaking. Then they heard a voice. A Varath voice, young, speaking in a rough whisper, clearly frightened. Cole called out first. He used the colony's standard emergency code phrase, 4 short words that the colony orientation program had given all residents on arrival. 3 years after his arrival, and he still remembered it exactly. There was a long pause, and then a head appeared above one of the boulders. A young Varath male, perhaps 40 years old in their terms, which was young by any reckoning. He had dust on his face and a long cut on his left hand that had been badly wrapped with a strip of fabric. His name was Pell, and he was a structural engineer from the colony's outer development zone. He had been in the field when the attack began and had been walking east ever since because east was away from the fire. With him were 2 others. One was a human woman named Carla Moss, who worked in the colony's medical unit and had been running a supply check in the outer sector when the sky broke open. She was compact and steady, with the kind of quiet composure that came not from training, but from temperament. She had a full medical bag over one shoulder and had clearly spent part of the previous night treating Pell's hand. The other was an elderly Varath named Oren, who was a historian at the Colony Cultural Center and had no more business being out in volcanic highland terrain than a piece of furniture. And he was perhaps 380 years old and moved carefully and was in significant pain from a badly bruised arm that he had hurt during the initial bombardment. He was not complaining about the pain, but his face communicated it clearly. Cole looked at all 3 of them for a moment. Then he looked at Carla. "What supplies do you have?" he asked. She told him. He combined what she had with what he and Lyra had, sorted it into 2 packs for even weight distribution, and made a quiet recommendation about which items were essential and which could be left behind. He was not in charge, technically. No one had said he was in charge. But Pell, who was twice Cole's height and had 3 times his physical strength, simply watched Cole organize and nodded. And that was how it began. The second day was harder. Oren's bruised arm was worse by morning, and the swelling told Carla that it might be a minor break rather than a bruise. She wrapped it more firmly and gave him the only pain tab she had kept for non-emergency use. He walked. He was slow, but he walked. Cole adjusted the group's pace around Oren without announcing that he was doing so. He found reasons to stop that were not about Oren's pain. Interesting terrain features, necessary water checks. One moment when he genuinely had spotted a Keth patrol drone in the middle distance, and they all went flat in a dry creek bed for 20 minutes, watching through the rock scrub as the drone traced a slow, square pattern across the slope above them. The drone passed. They kept moving. Pell came up beside Cole at one point during the afternoon and spoke to him in a low voice. You knew that drone was going to pass over. How?" "Pattern," Cole said. "It had already made 3 passes, same spacing. I just waited to see where the 4th one would be." Pell was quiet for a moment. "I have better eyes than you." "Yeah," Cole said. "But you were watching the drone. I was watching the pattern." Pell did not have a response to that. He walked beside Cole for a while after, and the hierarchy of the group, which had never been formally stated, became clearer to everyone without a single word being spoken about it. Lyra walked behind Cole and watched him and thought about the things she was seeing. It was not that he was not tired. He was tired. She could see it in the way he moved by the end of the second day. A little heavier in the step, a little slower to stand after they rested. There was a slight stiffness in his shoulders that he rolled out when he thought no one was looking. He was tired, and his feet hurt, and he was cold at night in a way that she, with her better thermal regulation, was not. She could see all of that. And yet he kept moving. Not because he was too foolish to stop, not because he did not feel it. She was close enough to him to see that he felt all of it. He simply continued, the way a river continues. Not because it has chosen to, because stopping is not in the set of options it considers. On the third night, they sheltered in a deep lava cave that cut into the hillside about 4 meters, far enough to block wind and light. They ate the last of the meal tabs. Carla checked everyone's condition in the low glow of a single heat pack. Pell's hand was healing cleanly. Oren's arm hurt but was stable. Our Cole had blisters on both feet that had torn open during the day's walking. He had not said a word about them. Carla cleaned and wrapped them with the brisk efficiency of a medical professional and gave him a look that said everything. "You could have told me yesterday," she said. "They didn't need wrapping yesterday," he said. "They needed wrapping yesterday," she said. "They're wrapped now," he said. He said it without a smile, but also without irritation, which was somehow the most disarming thing he could have done. Lyra sat in the cave entrance, looking out at the dark terrain, and listened to this exchange behind her. She thought about the calf in the ditch in Montana. She thought about Cole sitting in frozen ground and waiting until the animal decided it was ready to stand up. She thought about how her colleagues had smiled politely at her wedding and asked their quiet questions. She thought about Elder Soven watching Cole carry equipment across the courtyard and asking if he needed help. She thought about how completely, thoroughly, she had also not understood. Not the way she understood now, sitting at the mouth of a cave on the second night of a war she had never expected to live through, listening to the steady, unhurried voice of the man she married as he thanked Carla for wrapping his feet. Tomorrow, they would reach the station. She did not know yet what they would find there, but she knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with data or analysis that whatever they found, Cole Harmon would look at it, add it to the list in his head, and figure out the next necessary thing. That was enough. And for now, that was more than enough. My human husband seemed so weak, until our world fell apart. Part 4. They reached the Torvin Secondary Research Station on the morning of the 4th day, when the light was pale and the air was sharp with cold, and Lyra allowed herself, for the first time since the attack, to feel something close to relief. The station was a cluster of low, reinforced buildings set into the base of the second ridgeline, built for long-term research isolation, rated for extreme weather and minor seismic events, stocked with independent power and water. It was not glamorous, but it was standing, which was more than she could say for a great deal of Vareth Prime at the moment. There were 58 survivors inside. They were a mixed group, mostly Vareth civilians from the outer settlement zones, and a handful of humans, a few mixed species families who had been in the eastern sectors when the attack came. Many of them had injuries in various stages of treatment. All of them had the same look in their eyes, the kind of look that comes when someone has had to leave something behind in a hurry and has not yet had time to decide what they feel about it. The person notionally in command was a Vareth military officer named Commander Tail. He was not a field officer. His rank was administrative from the colony's Civil Defense Division, but he had the highest formal authority of anyone present, and in the absence of any other structure, he had assumed the role of leader. He had been at the station for 2 days already and had spent most of those 2 days organizing the survivors, distributing supplies, and when arriving at the conclusion that they should wait. He briefed Cole and Lyra and the others within the first hour. The situation was this. The station had food and water for approximately 10 to 12 days. The long-range communications array on the ridge above the station was damaged. One relay component had been knocked out, possibly by a proximity shock wave from a weapons strike on the eastern sector. It was repairable, but the relay tower was exposed on open ground above the ridgeline, and Keth scout units had been sighted in the nearby terrain twice in the past 24 hours. A working array meant they could reach the Galactic Senate emergency frequency. A signal on that frequency would bring a response fleet, assuming any portion of the Senate's emergency network was still functioning. Without the array, they were invisible. Commander Tile had assessed the repair mission as too dangerous. He had a Verith engineer on site who could make the repair in under 30 minutes given the right conditions. But the conditions, meaning the absence of Keth scouts, were not guaranteed, and he was not willing to risk personnel for an uncertain outcome when waiting might eventually produce a safer window. He had been making this assessment for 2 days. Cole sat through the briefing without speaking. He asked 4 questions when it was done, about the scout sighting locations, about the patrol timing Tale had observed, about the physical layout of the terrain between the station and the relay tower, and about what exactly was broken and what the repair required. Tale answered all 4 questions with the mild impatience of someone who has already considered every angle and finds it slightly tedious to re-explain. After the briefing, Cole walked to where Carla and Pell were settling Orin into a rest space and spoke to them quietly. "I'm going up to the relay tower tonight," he said. "I need someone who can run the array from inside the station once the relay is patched, and I need someone who can carry more than I can carry in case the repair kit is heavy." Pell looked at him. "The commander said it was too dangerous." "The commander's been saying that for 2 days," Cole said. "In another 8 days, they're out of food." Pell had no answer to that. Carla said, "I can run a comm array. I had technical cross-training in the medical unit." "Good," Cole said. He looked at Pell. Pell was quiet for a moment. Then, "I will carry the kit." Cole nodded. Then he turned and found Lyra standing behind him, because she had followed him without quite deciding to. "I'm coming with you," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. His expression was the one she had learned to read as him making a real consideration, not just a polite one. "I know," he said, which was not agreement and not argument and somehow meant both. They left at 2 hours past midnight, when the station was dark and quiet, and the cold was at its worst. Cole, Lyra, and Pell, with the repair kit in a pack on Pell's back. Carla remained at the station comm panel, ready. The terrain from the station to the relay tower was 200 meters of open slope, broken by clusters of rock and low ridge formations. There was no cover on the final 50 meters approaching the tower itself, just flat ground and the tower structure rising against the sky. Cole had spent the entire evening watching the ridgeline from the station's highest window, not constantly, but in the same regular pattern he used when he was watching for drone activity. By the time they left, he had a sense of the silence intervals between whatever was moving out there. He moved in a way that Lyra found difficult to describe afterward. Not fast, almost the opposite of fast. He moved the way something moves when it has decided that being seen is the only real problem, and that speed is a secondary concern. He picked every step on the loose rock as though the rock had feelings about being stepped on. He changed direction twice for reasons that were not immediately visible to Lyra, but both times they avoided cresting a line of sight that turned out, minutes later, to have had something moving along it. Pell moved well. He was physically quieter than Lyra had expected from someone his size, and the pack on his back was fully controlled throughout. He stayed 2 steps behind Cole and matched his pace without being told. Lyra focused on her feet and her breathing. They were 30 meters from the tower when Cole stopped and held up his hand. They went flat in the shadow of a low rock formation. Lyra pressed against the ground and felt the cold of it through her thermal layer and did not move. A Keth scout unit came over the ridge to the east. It was smaller than she had imagined from the historical descriptions, roughly the size of a large animal, low to the ground, moving with a mechanical precision that had nothing to do with organic life. Its sensor apparatus swept the terrain in front of it in a rhythm that was almost meditative. It came over the ridge and moved across the slope at an angle that would carry it roughly 40 meters north of their position. If they stayed still. Cole was already still. He had been still from the moment he stopped, Not tense, still, not the rigid stillness of someone fighting their own body, just still. The way stone is still. Like he had simply informed his body that this was not a moment for anything, and his body had accepted the information without argument. Lyra counted in her head. She got to 11 minutes before the scout unit completed its sweep and moved back over the ridge and was gone. 11 minutes on cold ground, perfectly motionless. Cole got up, dusted his hands, and walked to the tower. Pell had the repair kit open in 40 seconds. Cole and Pell worked together on the relay component while Lyra watched the ridge line. The repair was exactly what the engineer at the station had described, a connectivity issue in the relay coupling, fixable with the right tool and about 25 minutes of patience. Pell did the physical work. Cole held the light and passed tools and said quietly, when necessary, things like left side, the smaller connector, in a tone that was not instruction so much as thinking out loud. 22 minutes after they reached the tower, the relay clicked into alignment. Cole reached for the short-range comm device and said, "Carla, it's up. Send the signal." There was a pause. Then Carla's voice, a low and steady, "Sending." And that was the moment the second scout found them. It came from the west, not the east, and it was faster than the first one. It had been close enough to detect the relay activation, or perhaps it had been on a patrol loop that brought it here regardless. There was no way to know and no time to consider it. It came over the ridge at speed, and its sensor array locked onto them before Cole had time to do anything about the sight line. What happened next was not graceful. It was not the kind of thing that gets told as a heroic story with sharp moves and clever words. Cole simply stepped directly into the scout unit's path. He did it deliberately, pulling its attention toward him and away from Lyra and Pell. He used the terrain the way he had used it all night. Every rock, every slope, forcing the scout to move around obstacles to get to him, buying seconds, then more seconds. He took a hit from the scout's contact weapon on his right side. It knocked him off his feet and he went down hard on the rocky ground. He got back up. He was slower than before, and his right arm was not working correctly, and she could see from where she was standing that something was wrong with his ribs. He got up anyway, and he kept the scout's attention, and he kept moving, and Lyra hit the scout unit from its blind side with everything she had, and it went down. The slope went quiet. She was at Cole's side before the scout unit had stopped moving. He was on the ground again. He had sat down, or perhaps his legs had made the decision without him, and he was breathing in a controlled way that told her the ribs were bad. She put her hands on him. He let her. "Did it go through?" he said. His eyes were on her, not on his own injury, not on the scout unit, not on the sky. On her. "Did the signal go through?" he said again, quieter this time. "Yes," she said. "It went through." He closed his eyes. A long, slow exhale, the kind that releases something that has been held for a long time. "Good," he said. "That's good." Pell was already kneeling beside them. Lyra looked up at the Vareth engineer, twice Cole's height, 3 times his strength, young and able and completely lost in this moment, and said very calmly, "Help me get him back to the station." Pell nodded. He reached down and lifted Cole as carefully as anything Lyra had ever seen him do. Cole, to his credit, did not tell them he was fine. He just let them carry him, and kept breathing, and did not stop. My human husband seemed so weak, until our world fell apart, Part 5. The rescue fleet arrived 31 hours after the signal went out. Lyra knew it was coming before anyone could confirm it, because Cole's condition had become the thing her whole mind was focused on, and she needed something outside of it to hold on to. She sat with him through the night in the station's small medical room, watching Carla work, listening to the careful and precise way Carla explained what was broken and what needed to be done, and what the body would do on its own given time, and what it would need help with. 2 cracked ribs, damage to the muscles along his right side from the contact weapon, a mild concussion from the fall on the rock, burns on his forearm that looked bad but were, Carla said, manageable. He was conscious through most of it. He did not make a great deal of noise. At one point, he asked Carla if she had any coffee, and when she looked at him with the expression of someone who was not sure whether to laugh or to be concerned, he said he was just asking. It was fine, and then he said nothing more about it. Lyra did not leave the room. She had sat through long nights before in her 2 centuries of life. She had sat beside colleagues after field accidents, beside elderly family members in their final years. She understood how waiting worked. She had always believed, a calm and rational relationship with uncertainty. She was Varath. She could endure. What she had not understood until this night was the difference between enduring something that had happened to someone you respected and enduring something that had happened to someone whose absence would take a piece of the world with it. Those were 2 completely different kinds of waiting, and only one of them required the calm she had always been proud of. The other one required something she did not have a Varath word for. She held his hand. He was asleep by the 3rd hour. She held it anyway. The signal reached the Galactic Senate Emergency Network and was picked up by a response fleet that had already been scrambled after the initial reports of the Keth incursion. The fleet had been moving toward the Varath system, searching for a confirmed survivor position to target. Cole's signal gave them the coordinates. 31 hours after Carla pressed send at the station comm panel, the first ship broke through the cloud cover above the eastern ridgeline, and the people inside the Torvin station heard it and went outside and stood in the cold morning air and looked up. It was a large fleet. The sight of it made several people cry, which is something that happens when the thing you have been needing finally arrives. Lyra stood in the doorway and watched them come. Behind her, in the medical room, Cole Harmon slept through the rescue. She thought that was appropriate. The weeks that followed were not easy. Nothing about the aftermath of the Keth incursion was easy. The fleet pushed the Keth forces back from Varath Prime in a campaign that took 3 weeks and cost lives. The colony lost several of its outer settlements entirely. The main hub was heavily damaged. There was a long and painful process of accounting, for buildings, for infrastructure, and most heavily, for people. Lyra threw herself into the recovery work. She used her biology expertise in the medical triage operations, cataloging injury types, organizing patient intake, working with the fleet's medical units on treatment protocols for Varath physiology. She worked long hours because the work was there and the work was real, and working meant she did not have to sit still and feel the full weight of what had nearly happened. Cole spent 9 days in the fleet's medical facility. Lyra went every morning and every evening. She worked in between. On the 5th day, Elder Sovin visited. Lyra was sitting outside Cole's room when Sovin arrived, having come from a colony leadership briefing where, and she understood Cole's name had come up in the context of the relay signal. Sovin was old, even by Varath standards, nearly 600 years, and moved with the measured pace of someone who has learned not to hurry. He stopped beside Lyra in the corridor and looked through the window of the medical room at Cole, who was sitting up in his bed eating something from a tray with the expression of a man who had opinions about it. Sovin was quiet for a long moment. "The signal came from the Torvin relay," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Lyra said, "and it was your husband who made the repair mission." "He led it," Lyra said. "Pell and I went with him." Sovin was quiet again. Then, and in the careful tone of someone who is saying something they have thought about, "I think I may have misjudged your husband." Lyra looked at her supervisor, this ancient, careful, brilliant man who had studied life across a dozen worlds and held every living thing up to a standard of measured worth. And she felt something that was not quite anger and not quite satisfaction. It was something softer than both. "Most people did," she said. "I did too for a while." Soven nodded slowly. He looked through the window once more and then went on his way, which was the most Soven thing he could have done. Cole was well enough to sit outside on the 7th day. They sat on a bench at the edge of the facility grounds, in the pale sunlight that Vareth Prime offered in this season, and looked out at the mountains. But the eastern ridgeline was visible from here, the Torvin Ridge. Lyra could see the relay tower from where they sat, a small, dark shape against the sky. She had been carrying a question for days. She had been waiting for the right moment, which she had learned was not a Vareth habit, but was, apparently, a thing she had acquired from living with a human. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay," he said. "On the ridge," she said. "You knew you were going to take a hit. You stepped into its path deliberately. You knew what was going to happen." He did not answer immediately. He looked at the mountains. "Yeah," he said. "How did you do that?" she asked. "Not the mechanics of it. I understand the mechanics. I mean, how does a person do that? Knowingly." He was quiet for a while, and not avoiding the question. She could tell the difference by now, just finding the right words, the way he always did when something mattered. "I grew up watching animals give up," he said. "And I watched my dad almost not make it through a bad winter on the ranch one year. Bad storm, bad luck, the whole thing coming apart at once. And he just didn't stop. Not because he knew it was going to be okay. He didn't know that. He just kept doing the next thing. Every time there was a next thing, he did it." He paused. "I don't know if it's a choice, exactly," he said. "I think it's more like, you just keep moving until you find out whether you can. And then you know. One way or the other, you know." Lyra looked at him. She was a biologist. She knew the science of human pain tolerance. The neurological studies on how human function under duress compared to other species, the papers on cortisol management and the unusual relationship between suffering and performance in Homo sapiens. She had read them. She could reproduce the findings from memory. She understood something now that the papers did not contain. The papers described what humans did. They did not describe what it felt like to be standing on a cold ridge at midnight, watching the person you loved make himself a target so that you could finish the thing that needed finishing. The papers did not describe what it felt like to realize, in that moment, that the most quietly terrifying being you had ever encountered in 2 centuries of life was the man who grew vegetables in the backyard and never combed his hair properly and made stew from things that had no business being in the same pot. "Cole," she said. "Yeah? I need to tell you something." "Okay," he said. "I spent the first year of our marriage noticing every way in which you were not as physically capable as a Vareth," she said. "I did not do it with cruelty, but I did it. I measured you against a standard that was not yours, and you never fit it, and I filed that away as a fact about you." He was looking at her now. "I was wrong to do that," she said, "not just because the standard was wrong, because I was measuring the wrong thing entirely." He was quiet. Then, "I know," he said. "I always knew." She looked at him. "And you stayed." He looked back at her, with that calm that was not performed and not practiced, but simply was, the way breathing simply is. "Of course I stayed," he said. There was nothing to add to that, so she did not add anything. She just sat beside him in the pale Vareth Prime sunlight on a bench outside a medical facility, looking at the mountains, while the colony began the long work of putting itself back together. Months passed. The outer settlements were rebuilt. The Keth incursion was officially recorded, analyzed, and added to the Galactic Senate's security framework with the grim efficiency of bureaucracy processing a catastrophe. Vareth Prime was given additional orbital defense resources and a formal military presence. Life resumed its shape, bent differently than before in some places, but resumed, and Lyra and Cole went home. Their house was damaged on the northern side. A wall cracked, the porch railing gone, some of the garden destroyed. Cole assessed it the same way he assessed everything, walking the perimeter slowly and pressing his hands against things and thinking. Within a week, he had a repair plan. Within a month, the wall was fixed, and the porch had a new railing that was slightly better than the old one. The garden took longer. He replanted it methodically, testing the soil, adjusting the ratios, checking his results with the agricultural database, and also with his hands each morning. One evening, several months after they came home, Lyra sat at the kitchen table and watched him cook dinner. And he was making the same stew he had been making on the last evening before everything broke, the one with earth lentils and local grain that she had always secretly found more satisfying than anything from the nutrition center, though she had never told him that. He was talking. He was telling her a story about a horse and a fence post in Montana that she was fairly certain was exaggerated in several key details. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the volcanic ridgelines were going amber in the evening light, the way they always did, the way they would keep doing long after both of them were gone. She listened, all the way through this time, every word, because she understood now what she had been slow to understand before, that the universe does not hand its most remarkable things to you in the shapes you are expecting. It does not announce them. It does not make them obvious. Sometimes the most dangerous and most alive thing you will ever encounter comes to you quietly, in worn boots, with rough hands, telling a story about a calf in a ditch, cooking dinner because it tastes better when someone makes it. Her human husband, Cole Harmon, who had seemed so weak, until the world fell apart and showed her what weak actually meant, and what it did not. She never made that mistake again.